I'm Brian Wills, and I'd like to welcome you to another visit with Joe Smiddy. We have some special guests today, and we're in a special location. We're in Charlottesville for a visit with the president of the University of Virginia, John T. Casteen, and he's graciously opened his office for us. Of course, you recognize Papa Joe Smiddy, the director and chancellor, now Chancellor Emeritus of Clinch Valley College of the University of Virginia, and the current Chancellor, David Pryor, Chancellor of the University of Virginia's College at Wise. And I don't know if it sounds like an awful lot of University of Virginia's, Joe, but there are a lot of those in there. And we've talked about the history of the college and its early start, and we've talked a lot about the three wise men and a lot of those earliest years, so I don't think we're going to necessarily want to rehash that. But if you kind of look back as you think about the relationship between Charlottesville and Wise and the university and the college, who were some of the people besides Colgate Darden and Sam Crockett that stand out to you?
Well, we were so fortunate in that Joe Vaughn, of course, was appointed by Mr. Darden as the provost, and also he assigned Clinch Valley College to Joe for educational purposes, but all the other matters would come to the president's office, to Mr. Darden. So Joe Vaughn was a good person, and he was courteous enough to bring lots of visitors from the university to Clinch Valley, and he made friends with the people in the Wise area, and also with the first faculty and students, and brought wonderful people, Dean Quarles from the engineering school, Dean Cherry from the educational school, and a lot of other people from different departments of the university, and so that really helped and built up the idea that we were doing some worthwhile things in Wise, and so that made the school what it is today, because we were able to, without the University of Virginia, Clinch Valley College never could have succeeded. And for the first time in the mining area, the University of Virginia's college at Wise was the first institution where people truly were free to express themselves, and it wasn't all bad, but the mining people, the superintendents of the mines, were gods. I mean, what they said was it. But all of a sudden, here's a place where God doesn't rule. And they had a real hard time with that to begin with, because that was a new thing in the coal area, academic freedom, where faculty members, students, staff members were free to express themselves, and knowing that they had the University of Virginia to support them. And that's what really made the school great, was this opportunity to express themselves without fear and to be able to learn and teach. And that was a brand new thing in our area. And to give you an example, when the college started, I went out and we had one teacher in Wise County that had a bachelor's degree from the University of Virginia. And we had a great number of teachers teaching. Some were just high school education, and a number of them with teachers having 1 year of college, and most of the teachers had just 2 years of college. So that's what we had to begin with when the college started. So the wonderful thing is that 4 years after Clinch Valley was founded, I went out to the school board office. We had 30 teachers with a bachelor's degree from Charlottesville, because most of those students at UVA Wise, Clinch Valley in those days, they actually, when they finished 2 years, they came to Charlottesville. So we had a great number of students. And also, President Casteen, the wonderful thing about that for us, my students that left my biology class came to Ladley Houston's class. And we had instant assessment. He knew exactly when these students came into his class, he knew what we were doing at Clinch Valley College. And that had a very interesting effect on what we were doing and what they were doing here in Charlottesville. So we are greatly blessed, so blessed, and without the University of Virginia, we wouldn't be there. That's all there is to it.
You know, we talked earlier about George Zemer, and you know, one of the projects I had for coming to Charlottesville was to go to the cemetery where Zemer's buried, because we're trying to work on a buildings project, and we wanted to get the dates, birth dates and death dates and these sorts of things, and was able to do that. And of course we talked about that George was maybe not so enamored with the college, and we've talked about that story, but I think one thing you and I agreed, that if we could get them to Wise, the college grew on them. And even for Zemer, it seemed like the college took on a lot more meaning near the end of his life than maybe it took on in his earlier time of knowing about the college. Do you think that was a trait, that if you could get somebody to come to Wise, that sort of grow on them?
Absolutely. And you're right. Now, Mr. Darden, of course, always loved people. And Mr. Darden, in his inaugural address here, he expressed that Thomas Jefferson's wanted the university to reach the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. And he expressed, Mr. Darden said, well, this is one way we can help do that. We can extend our academical village to Southwest Virginia. So Mr. Darden loved people and was a wonderful, he is so good, and I was so blessed, absolutely. I've been thankful every day of my life that I got to spend that time with Mr. Darden, and to know a man that's so great and so good, and and humble, kind man, and cared about people, and had expressed that so humbly to everybody in Southwest Virginia. So we were greatly blessed. Without the Lord sure lined up the stars when he put Mr. Darden as president, because that helped us become what we were able to do.
And we were talking too about, you know, Sam being one of those people that you just, you know, he kind of went around the corners when he needed to. He was an optimist who always thought anything was possible, and that was a blessing too, that you had people that thought that Clinch Valley was something that should happen and was possible, and I think as you look back on it, you can see all of these great and tangible results that have come. Now let me ask President Casteen, I'm sure a lot of folks just frankly don't know of your connection with the university itself before you were president, but you were actually here working for a period of time. Was that in admissions?
There were two periods of contact, and I was thinking, listening to Joe talk, that there's some background that might be useful to you, and you can cut this out of the tape if you want to. One of the things to understand about Mr. Darden, there are two things about him, thousands of things. He was one of the most complicated people I've ever known. But a couple of things that are relevant here. One is, Joe talked about Mr. Darden's humility and the fact that he was someone who simply loved people. His family background is unusual for Virginia. His family were Southampton County Quakers. And there is a kind of a gentle and humble manner that goes with people of that origin that Mr. Darden had until the day he died. He had a personality that was very much in the Virginia green, but a special part of the green that's quite different from the rest of the state. It was a natural thing for him to fall in love with Southwest Virginia. But then there's another thing about him, and then the other folk Joe mentioned I wanted to put on the table. Mr. Darden was president here during a period of massive expansion because of the GI Bill. And he was critically aware from his earlier period before he was even in Congress in Norfolk of the fact that education was not evenly or fairly distributed across the state of Virginia. in the time when Mr. Darden was involved in local politics in Tidewater, the College of William and Mary and UVA were called on to provide extension centers in Norfolk. And the political force that made that happen was that faction of Tidewater politics that Mr. Darden was in. He believed in bringing the resources of the universities into localities where there was need. But then there's another piece of it. Mr. Darden chose a very unusual group of people to work with him. Joe mentioned Lawrence Quarles and Ralph Cherry. And Mr. Zemer is a case of the same thing. But these are people whose vision of the role of the public university was very much the same as Mr. Darden's. They were much more like land-grant university people in the Middle West than you normally find in eastern or southeastern universities, and that they didn't think that the university should stay at home on its home campus or grounds here. They did believe that the university had obligations to the whole state. I first knew about the college in the mid-60s, in fact, in two different phases. Joe knows the story, but one of my brothers was very interested in the University of Virginia, but he wanted a small college. And Buck Henson one day was good enough to meet my brother and me and give us a tour of the college when my brother was looking at colleges. So we came away from that with the sense that there was this little jewel that both of us said would someday be something extraordinary. And this was not philosophers talking. It was a brother who was probably a third-year student in college and another brother who was probably a high school junior. It didn't work out that he went there, but then subsequently, when David Shannon was the provost here, I was an assistant dean in the college, and this was the late 60s. And by that time, what is now the College at Wise was firmly established as a part of Virginia's educational system. But it was one of a number of what used to be called branch campuses of Charlottesville. The branch campuses were, in each instance, accommodations to local demand, but only in the case of Southwest Virginia, in the case of the college that was established at Wise, was the demand met by the kind of personal and immediate commitment to a region that Mr. Darden had when he had his first contacts with the people who wanted to start the college. There were different situations in the other colleges, but Zemer and Lawrence Quarles and Ralph Cherry and certainly Joe Vaughn were involved in all of these. In the case of the one that was established at Fairfax Station, this became George Mason University, it was clear by the time I was an assistant dean in the late 60s that unless it was independent, the state was not going to pay what it would cost to build a major university in Northern Virginia, that it would always be an underfinanced, almost second thought if it did not become independent. In the case of the one on the Eastern Shore and the one that was in Martinsville, by the time the Virginia Community College came along under Governor Godwin, the system, it was obvious that those communities' first needs were for community colleges. The College at Wise, unique in this group, had developed an upper division, the four-year program that Joe fostered in the mid-50s. And the College at Wise, Joe mentioned Ladley Houston. Ladley Houston was my first-year biology teacher. And you knew you were dealing with something serious.
Exactly right.
But in any event, when people like Mr. Houston began to get excited about the quality of students they saw, the college asserted a kind of presence here that the other so-called branch institutions didn't have. We had imagined at one point that there would be 5 of those. And in truth, the one that became simply an integral part of the University of Virginia and made it something other than a single campus institution was the College at Wise. But it was this peculiar period in terms of rapid growth, the assertion of a public mission as a matter of pride and not simply as an obligation. Mr. Darden was proud of the fact that he was the president of a public university. And then these unusual administrators who believed in the values of the land-grant university. We're not a land-grant university, but they believed in reaching out. And that mentality, I think, was It was a phenomenon of a particular place and time. By the time I was in WISE regularly, when I was the admissions dean in the late 70s, David Shannon had made the college at Clinch Valley College. He had made that our first priority away from Charlottesville. And when I would send David my travel schedules in the fall, he would always make note of when I would be in Southwest Virginia, and he would say, you call on people there. And at some point, it seems silly, but I think he had me carry a bushel of apples in your direction. The general, David, brought the apples this way and gave us apples. But by that period, I would say that the vision that you had become very much the university's vision. Mr. Darden was retired and had gone home to Norfolk to live. Edgar Shannon was the one who had developed most of the regional services other than the campus at WISE. Edgar was from a very different tradition. Wonderful man who loved Virginia, but not a land-grant college vision, something else. So there were complementary but different visions of the public obligations of the University of Virginia that prepared this place for what spontaneously developed on a very different timetable in Wise County. That somehow the two things came together.
I think one of the things we were talking about is that you get so many different elements that work together, and that WISE, in its time, came together at a time when it could benefit Charlottesville as well as Charlottesville could benefit WISE. And we were jokingly talking about apples. We were joking about Senator Long carrying a bag of apples because he didn't want to spend his money trying to buy lunch. But in terms of a legislative connection, do you feel like that WISE was of a benefit in that sense? As Joe was always good with the banjo, I won't say what else he might have been caught in Richmond with, but at entertaining and bringing attention to Southwest Virginia, maybe even to University of Virginia in the process.
You know what I think it may have done is, first of all, provide a reason for Mr. Darden's humble approach to what it was to be a Virginian with educational responsibilities. He never saw himself as having powers. He had responsibilities. And he felt privileged to have the responsibilities. He felt as though that was almost a gift that the Commonwealth had given him. But you go from that to his alliance with Southwest Virginia. To my knowledge, it did not go back to his time in Congress or as governor. I think it was a creature of his affection for the college.
I think that's right.
And it became, in a way, the kind of it was a collaboration that lasts. When the state did the restructuring of its system of higher education and legislation passed in 2005, 2006, Virginia Tech, the College of William & Mary, and UVA were set aside as one tier. And there was never even a discussion of the College at WISE being included. It's an extraordinary benefit to the college. But the political understanding of the two institutions is that we are one institution. And that's a matter, I think, of a generation's maturation of political sympathy between the two regions of the state, built on what I think is the best possible basis. It's not built on, I get a bridge and you get a hospital. It's built instead on, we are all Virginians. We have common interests in the public good that institutions can do. And whatever one might say about the antiquity and so on of the university here in Charlottesville, there is this exciting, somehow always young, but inevitable other University of Virginia in WISE. And even when the state was carving up responsibility for economic development work, also as part of the restructuring legislation in 2006, there was never any question that the University of Virginia's first obligation was to Southwest Virginia. I think that Mr. Darden's vision and then the land grant conception that these other people who worked for him brought to this equation, I think that has endured. And I have to say that some of the best advice one can get in public life in Virginia comes from elected or retired elected officials in Southwest Virginia. I've always encouraged everyone I meet of them to run for governor because there's something unique about the position of being at such a distance from Richmond, but having the kind of impact and capacity to tug the heartstrings that Southwest Virginia has with regard to all parts of Virginia. The Darden connection goes way beyond Charlottesville. It's a tie to Norfolk. It's a tie to that side of Hampton Roads. And because of the pride that people in that south side area take in those Quaker families and in the Dardens, that region knows who those folk are. And it's something that has brought Virginia together in a unique way.
You know, it's interesting. My father went to high school with Mills Godwin, and so we had Godwin on one side and Colgate Darden on the other. I grew up in old Nansemond County, and just that farm ethic too was a big part of it. But Joe has talked about. He's actually quoted someone. You might want to give the story. Quoting someone is saying that Colgate Darden was our unanimous donor.
Yeah, he's a unanimous donor. Yeah, I want to tell him two Colgate stories that he told me. True events that happened in Southwest Virginia. One, when he was running for governor, he was out in Scott County making a speech. He said one Saturday afternoon, and is out in the field, and there's some trees there, and said one fellow there apparently had had a little too much to drink, and he's leaning up against the tree, and Mr. Darden said he got up to speak, and he got into it pretty good, you know, and said this fellow hollered out big and loud, said, "Cut his galluses and let him soar."
Let him soar.
Cut his galluses and let him soar. And another that Mr. Darden told me that happened to him, he was the wartime governor, you know, in Virginia, and he was speaking at bond rallies. And he was scheduled to speak at a bond rally in Big Stone Gap. And he said they had the steps of the post office had crepe paper and had it all fixed up, you know. So Mr. Darden and Harry Bird was there with him, but Mr. Darden got there early by himself, and he went up and sat down in the seats where he thought the speakers would be, and said this fella came over and said, "Old buddy," said, "this is reserved for the big shots." Said, "You better come over here and get you a seat over here." And he said, "Yes, sir, I'll be glad to." So he went over there. He didn't say, you know, who he was. He went over and said, when Harry Bird and all of them come, said, "Colgate, what are you doing sitting over there?" He said, "One of these fellows put me over here." So wonderful people. Weldon Cooper used to come with Joe Vaughn.
Let me tell you Mr. Darden's story. I have a friend who drove Mr. Darden at one point during some campaign. It was almost certainly the gubernatorial campaign. He's got a story about driving past a field, and there was a man plowing, but he was plowing way over in the field, not next to the road. Mr. Darden said, "Stop, I want to go and talk to that man." So the driver stopped. Mr. Darden climbed the fence, walked through the fence rows and so on, and he got way over to where the man was on the tractor. He stood and talked to him for 20 minutes. And he came back, and he got in the car, and the fellow driving the car said, "Well, is he going to vote for you?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't ask him that."
Didn't ask him.
Mr. Darden used to come to our house when he'd come to Wise. Rosebud would fix his breakfast. He loved to come to our house to eat breakfast. And daughter Elizabeth, you know, was the same age as the college. And he is so kind to daughter Elizabeth. He'd take her little hand and walk with her up in the apple orchard we had there behind the house, and he'd pick some apples and put some in his pocket, and he'd give Elizabeth one and tell her to go take that to your mother. But he's so kind to children, I notice.
Guy Friedel had great pictures of Mr. Darden with children. You know, he did this biography of Mr. Darden. It's a standard. You mentioned Weldon Cooper. There is another case of the what I would call, in a cultural sense, the Middle Western land grant notion of what a university should do. Mr. Cooper believed that our obligation was to serve all of Virginia, that we should be active in every county and in every locality, and that we should be working to improve the quality of people going into public service. He had a large philosophy about doing that. He also had an extraordinary technical capacity. Mr. Zemer, Mr. Cooper, a few others, Mr. Shea, knew how to put dollars into the right ledgers. And that technical capacity was, I think, one of the great strengths that Mr. Darden and also Mr. Shannon drew on as they were. In the early days, they were often having to divide resources that were simply state tax dollars that had been allocated in a sort of a block fashion to the Board of Visitors. Very different situation from more recent years when we've been able to build it's not a cushion exactly, but a kind of a carpet of private funding underneath the structure that we can use. I think in many respects the good things that we've accomplished, and we failed a lot of things over the years, but the good things have Mr. Cooper's fingerprints on them.
He is a wonderful man. Just really, as you said, interested in, he'd go over to the courthouse and just go from one office to the other, just visiting with people and kind. And Joe Vaughn, he liked Joe Vaughn, and he'd come along with, we'd bring some Jack Daniels if you wanted to. Weldon would take a drink, and we'd take one with him. And but
For medicinal purposes.
right, that's for medicinal purposes.
Times when you can't leave them alone.
Now, whom was President Casteen was the famous mathematician, as chairman here of the math department, was so kind to come out to the college quite often and teach classes. And
You may be talking about Ed Floyd.
well, Ed was one of
He
them,
was a
and
prost,
Ed
of
did do
course.
that. But no, there's a fellow.
You know, you're a little bit before my time. You're talking about the time when Gordon Wyburn and
Yeah, exactly right.
Gordon and Bill Whedon,
You're right.
and there was the third one. I don't remember the name.
Yeah, that a lot of people have missed that important committee that was set up by Mr. Darden and Dr. Zemer, and that was made up of the department chairman and the very people you mentioned were on that committee.
You know, and I mentioned that my second period of contact with the college was when I was an assistant dean. When Mr. Shannon was president, there were committees of various kinds that were supposed to make faculty members be of service. I happened to be put on one that was charged with assisting a Ford Foundation grant in several of the mountain counties in this part of Virginia. They were immediately adjacent counties. But he would put a dean, I was working on a committee of which the chair was Dick Brandt, who was the dean of education at the time. But he put a dean, he would put someone like me, that is, somebody who didn't count for anything, but just stuck me on the committee so I could learn something. And then a couple of teaching faculty members from different departments, and simply instruct us to go and provide services to these units. That, I guess that too reflects what I'm describing as the coincidence between the GI Bill service mentality that Mr. Darden had, and then what I have always associated with something being more Middle Western and land grant about the way things developed in the 60s and the 70s. There weren't as many silos in those days. We were all underfunded. We all had a sense of purpose about providing services to the state. There were many kinds of services. I remember the high school students used to come on the buses for the Virginia High School League events.
Mm-hmm.
There were forensics contests and so on.
We sent them up here, yes.
Went on all the time in those days. It was a good period in that sense.
President Casteen, I want to tell you one story that I think is interesting about the first days of the college. We had this young man whose father was a medical doctor in Norton, and Albert Bond was his name, and he had played chess with Professor Wilson, who was our first English teacher, and a real intellectual fellow. And by the way, we were never a 13th year of high school because of these wonderful faculty members that the University of Virginia was able to get, which we never could have gotten without the University of Virginia's name. But Professor Wilson played chess with this young man, and he's telling him, he said, Professor Wilson, I only need one unit to graduate from high school, and I'm going to have to lose a year of my life here taking this 1 year. So he said, well, come out there and talk to Joe at the college and let's see what we can work out. So Albert came out there to me and he told me his story, and he was a valedictorian. He was #1 in his class. And he said that he didn't want to waste a year, said I can go next summer and take this history course in high school and graduate from high school. And so I said, well, let's fill out an application. Now then all applications went to Charlottesville. So Albert filled out the application, and I sent it up to Marvin Perry, and Marvin brightly sent it back, said, this young man does not have a high school diploma. So what did I do? I pulled that bottom drawer out. I said, Albert, go down there and register. Albert went and registered. And Albert took 2 years with us with straight A's and went to Harvard. So
Albert was good material.
He did all right.
Edgar Shannon, Edgar now comes to me and says, I was meeting with President Pusey, and he was telling me about this young man that came from our college in Virginia, and he said, if you have any more like that, please send them up here. And so everybody says to me, did you tell him? I said, no, I didn't tell him. I said, because I was doing that every now and then. So I didn't want to let it out of the box. Albert is a PhD in nuclear physics. He's a professor of nuclear physics at one of the New York universities today. It's interesting. I always thought that President Shannon brought the word from President Pusey about our young man. But that's just one example.
I'm surprised that Marvin Perry was doing your admission decisions. That's an odd thing. I guess at the time we must not have known quite how to deal with a branch becoming an independent college within the university. I can't imagine that Marvin was very comfortable doing the job, because he wouldn't have known the high schools and would have known the neighborhoods.
That's right. He would not.
Yeah, he wasn't very comfortable from what we've heard, but another thing, we don't want you to give away trade secrets. If you view something in the bottom drawer, we don't want to pull that out on you, but Joe said that he liked to use that because he never knew when he might use it again.
Right, but I didn't want to give the secret. We were meeting with Marvin up here one time, and Dean Hamilton was the dean at the college. Now, Dean Hamilton was a loose cannon. If you he's a PhD, came from Duke.
Is this your dean or Charlottesville?
This was
Our dean, yeah.
This is our dean. Tom Hamilton. Tom was the dean at Clinch Valley, and came from Duke. And he was out there fella. I mean, he taught history, and he'd put one of these white mops on his head, and he was Ben Franklin. And he's a great teacher and a great person, but he was out there fella. So we were meeting up here with Marvin in admissions, and so Marvin was telling us that no student could be admitted to Clinch Valley that had not had the college board exam. Had to have SAT scores before they could be admitted. Hamilton said, oh, well, now, Dean Perry, that is no problem. We have a testing date at the college on the second day of registration. And if the students haven't had the college board, we'd give it to them. Old Marvin, he picked up the papers, he threw them up and said, to hell with this bunch from Clinch Valley.
I'll tell you a story on the other side of Marvin Perry. When I was a high school student in Portsmouth, I came home from school one day, and it was always trouble if there was a car parked in front of the house when I came home. There was a car parked in front of the house, and it was an official-looking car. In those days, university people drove state vehicles that had a seal on the door and so on. And I thought this is going to be a long afternoon. And so I opened the door and went in to face the music. And here was this man I did not know, wearing the nicest suit of clothes I had ever seen, sitting at the kitchen table. My parents had one of these kitchen tables where you had a metal piece in the middle and a pair of legs that had a loop on the bottom, and you could pull out these things on springs to make a little larger table, and it always wobbled. And Marvin and my parents were sitting there, and Marvin was showing my parents that I could so afford to go to college. And I've always felt very, very fond of him because I can't imagine anybody who would have gone to do that. You didn't go to Portsmouth to look for Rhodes Scholars. You know, we're a working class, kind of gritty town, and I like that about it. But this man came and he said, "There's another way to do this." And so I can picture him throwing the papers up. And I know another side of the man.
Tying it back in one more time to Colgate Darden, he was such a generous donor. I mean, he really was. He gave to the library. There were ways that, you know, if the library needed some funds, they showed up. And I'm not, again, advocating you do this, but sometimes he sacrificed salary, I understand, so that Clinch Valley could get some materials. So.
Oh yeah, he and his wife Connie were so generous, and that land over there on the Coburn side of the college, there's 14 acres over there, and he told me, he said, "Joe, go over there and buy that." I said, "What am I going to use for money?" He said, "Well," he said, "I'll talk to Connie about that." But he was so generous. He gave us 3 tracts of land. He gave us an endowed amount of money to help with a foreign travel program for the students. He gave endowed program to bring in speakers, and I mean good speakers, expensive speakers. I mean worldwide, renowned people, and so he was very generous, Brian, on so many things for the college.
Of course, that connection also continues to this day of the university making speakers available to us and professors from here that we would not ordinarily have access to, and we appreciate that very much. What we have, of course, up in Charlottesville, the film festival, famous film festival. We have a little bit of a Hollywood history too, don't we, Joe?
Yeah. I'm
not talking just about Joe Smiddy in a movie about a country music singer, although he was in that movie, Loretta Lynn's story. But the story of George C. Scott. George C. Scott's a Wise County native, and George C. Was helpful to the college, wasn't he?
Yeah, George C., you know, Patton, we're talking about Patton now. Patton was born in Wise, and his mother was a Slimp, which is a famous family of Bascom Slimp, the old congressman for years, a Republican congressman for years, but George, his grandfather died. His grandfather Slimp died, so he gave the college Grandpa's house, and so he came to visit the college, and so I was taking him around, introducing him to people, and George was not an easy fellow to deal with. He was cantankerous and mean, and wanted to be a baseball player, didn't want to be an actor. In fact, somebody asked him, how did he do in drama school? And he said, "I've never been to drama school a day in my life and don't intend to go in." He said, "I'm a journalism major." So, but I was walking down the hall with him, and he looked over and saw this fellow working at the college, Harry Bird Dickinson. So he went over to Harry Bird. He said, "Harry, what are you doing?" He said, "I work here at the college." And Harry looked up at him and said, "George, you owe me $8.50. He said, "I don't remember owing you any money, Harry." "Yeah, you owe me $8.50. He said, "I took my wife and went to that movie, Patton. Cost me $8.50. Said, "That's the sorriest movie I ever saw in my life." George said, Harry, damn if you ain't the most honest person I've met here today. He said, I agree with you 100%. So Harry, he did give us his house. I asked him, I said, do you want us to set up a drama scholarship? He said, no, that's the last thing in the world I want you to do. He said, I want you to set up a scholarship that any student in this area that needs the money can have, and don't put my name on it, put my grandfather's name on it.
So he gave the scholarship, but not the $8.50.
That's right.
Harry Bird never got his $8.
Harry Bird, he was something.
I actually thought Patton was a pretty good movie.
I did too, actually. I thought it was a great movie.
Yeah,
of course, now George C. was a good Scrooge too, I thought, but maybe
great.
he came by that natural. I don't know.
He's very natural.
Well, let me get us to a little bit later in the chronology. College going from 2 years to 4 years, and President Casteen, you'll have to help me a little bit. I know you were also in the state level with the Robb administration, but pick either one of those, and what are some impressions from that time period about WISE?
Well, in the period when I was in state government, there was an interesting issue that Chancellor Smiddy and I worked on together some. In those days, there was the notion that efficiency experts should determine how the state allocated its money. And there was a recommendation from one of the state agencies to close the college at WISE. And it's hard to say how much success the idea might have had politically, although enough that it was being talked about. But I remember a day when we talked about how to deal with it. And then a series of visits to legislators. It was a little tricky because the agency that had made the recommendation reported to the General Assembly. And so you didn't know going in whether the legislators were already sold on the position. I don't think the issue ever came to a vote. I think at the time you visited your friends and I visited the rest of them.
No, I don't think it did either. I think you did a job for us. The thing about that was that I went to President Casteen, who was then Secretary of Education for the state, and I told him, I said, and the state council, of course, wasn't giving us 1 ounce of help, and I went to President Casteen and told him, I said, you're the only friend we've got in this place, and if you don't help us, we're down the creek. And so
we found a lot of friends.
He said, well, we'll work on that, and thank the Lord for John Casteen, because he did work on that. And of course, we had some important people in the General
I was going to say that the lesson for me out of that was how important the Southwest Virginia legislators actually were, and the fact that no matter what party a legislator might have claimed to belong to, in those days, most of them were still calling themselves Democrats because it was before the big partisan change. But no matter what party, they could work together across county lines, they could work together across party lines. In those days, there was always controversy between the Senate and the House over anything. And the Southwest Virginia delegation had no problems with that. And the delegation had such an extraordinary range of contacts. One of the few physicians in the General Assembly was a member from Southwest Virginia at the time. And was able to get some help from Bill Lemon.
Yes.
Was able to go to people who were retired legislators and not really quite from the region, but they understood exactly what the issue was. And I think that thing died in a committee markup session.
That's what legislators create committees for, isn't it, to kill things off?
Well, I could see when I got into that committee that it was a death chamber for somebody because it was loaded. But the committee dealt with the real issues. It dealt with them with some dignity. I don't think that was ever in the newspapers. If it was, I don't recall it.
No, I don't think so.
But it came and it went with about all the fanfare it deserved. And what survived was this commitment to the college. There was another period that's interested me a lot because At some point after I became president here, the college decided whether it wanted to stay with the University of Virginia or not.
That's right.
And I admired that process a lot because it was a process in which people did not seem to have preconceptions. And the people who were examining the issues really did go through them in a way that I thought was a good example of good government working in the U.S., the college's board and so on, the American tradition of making decisions in a collegial and open way. It was a nonpartisan decision. There were both Democrats and Republicans by that time involved in it. But the leadership that I thought emerged from that discussion gave me a lot of optimism about the college's future. And when the chancellors who've served since that time took office or exercised their authority, I've thought that the combination of the commitment of the board at Wise to the relationship and the commitment of the board here, because we did a parallel process in Charlottesville. So the two boards were looking at the same issues at the same time and came to the same conclusion. I didn't know exactly how the board here in Charlottesville would go, because sometimes there's a tendency in boards to say, look, our first obligation is X and we don't do Y. But we came out with a decision in which on both sides the final decision was we do X and Y. And because of that, we're a stronger Z. That seemed to me to be an important turning point on both sides of the relationship.
I think we enjoy still a remarkable unanimity of opinion, not only in the general population, but our delegation in the Southwest. I've been struck by their ability to work together. And one of the things that you mentioned earlier repeatedly was your sense of the Midwest land grant spirit. And that's something certainly that I'm familiar with and I sense very strongly. Talking about serving the citizens is something that is understandable. And I get the feeling that the college has established that as a tradition, serving our community and our region, and that people understand that. And in a sense then say, you're going outside the halls of academia. You are a member of our community. And I've found a tremendous responsiveness to that.
I've always been struck by the fact that that system of value, that is that the college belongs to the community, that the college serves the community, has really defined the best of what the chancellors have done. I think that Chancellor Smiddy probably defined that early on. And it may be, in part, a reaction to the reality that of all of Virginia's colleges, this is the one that is clearly a result of a local passion to have a college in the locality. That the sense of mutual obligation, the college owing to the community and the community owing to the college, may be better established there.
You're exactly right. And I do want to mention D-Runk. D-Runk, he was so able to come out to the college, and I remember he brought that bust of Jefferson that the Seventh Society gave, and Ray Bias, Ray and D-Runk, and also one that you helped us so graciously with, Ernie Ern, came with Joe Vaughn, I'm telling you, way back in the beginning, and when he was Dean of Students, I guess, here then. And President Casteen, I want to thank you for your appointments to the college after my retirement, because without you and these appointments, I don't know where we'd be, but I'm so very thankful, and starting with Jay Lemons and Marcia, and they brought exactly what we needed at the time, and they learned so ably from you, and then of course we went to I guess was it the interim when George Culberson?
George was in
George, your appointment of George, and George, of course, is a wonderful, good person, and then to go from George to and also I want to thank you for sending Jim Knight back.
Yeah, we're glad to have him back.
I'm not going to claim much credit for that.
Yeah, we won't.
Each one of those persons, that is the college's board, the local board, identified and selected. In Jay's case, we knew we faced the need to make an immediate decision on the interim appointment. And I think I came in and met with faculty and talked about whether there was an appointment there, and the general feeling was that we had to find someone from somewhere else. And I had two different people working for me who seemed to me to be capable of doing the job. I didn't imagine that either of them would stay more than the time it would take to run a full search. But in Jay's case, in David's case, the chemistry between the community and the Chancellor was the deciding factor. There's something about chemistry in all of this story. I was thinking about the man you just mentioned. Mr. Runk, but for the fact that he loved the country, would not have been a natural element. Mr. Runk was very much focused on the classificational biology work that he did in his scholarship and on his role here as a chief administrator. But Mr. Runk simply loved being in places where people worked the soil and raised animals and so on. And he loved the manual work that was involved in it. His whole life here, he was engaged in that, and even when he became somewhat disabled, he stayed engaged. He became the best basket maker in Central Virginia as an old man, and taught courses on how to make baskets. And a different kind of chemistry, but with Ernie Earn, just a deep affection for the landscape.
Yes.
Traveling across the landscape with Ernie, you see things that are 50 feet down because he's describing processes that made the land and that sort of thing constantly. I think with Jay and Marcia, there was just a deep affection for the life of the small town, for the interaction between town and countryside that the college represented. They were very much products of a similar college background. David, my sense there was that at the stage of the college's development when he became interested in the chancellorship, his own interest in a kind of scholarship that serves the applications of the type of biological research that he's done, his affection for faculty work, as the faculty had become more and more sophisticated and complex over the years. The fit,
Right.
it's chemistry. With George Culberson, I may well have chosen George, I don't remember, but I sat down with George and I just said, George, talk to me about how you would do this. 10 minutes later, we had our guy because he made eminently good sense. There have been a couple of other cases at Wise where for one reason or another I was asked to make a choice. It wasn't that the board had backed away from a choice, has always made good choices, but there were things to be done quickly. And it seemed to be very easy to bring the expression of affection for the place and the people to the surface, and that it always seemed to me to be the most important quality you could find. Gil Blackburn, the conversation with him when we decided to name him provost. There had been a search, Joe, that had run for a long time that hadn't concluded. And Gil came in to talk to me about it. I liked the combination of genuine enthusiasm about the college and its people and the fact that he knew and respected faculty competencies from the work he had done to apply for the job on one side, and a kind of gentle style of leadership on the other side, where I felt that he was not going to be someone who would come in and break all the tables. He would come in and help polish them.
That's right.
And that, to the extent of my knowledge of what goes on a daily basis, is what a provost needs to do well.
And he is doing it so well. And I want to thank you for David and Mary Lou. You and the board.
He brought Mary Lou.
You and the board and the Lord sent David and Mary Lou, because what a blessing they are to every aspect of the college community. And thank you for David and Mary Lou. And what a sweet, wonderful person his wife is.
I'm old enough to have learned to take all the credit I'm given, but the board and the faculty, I think, really are responsible for their coming. I would say this: I like the fact that when the job is hard, and as you know, the job is hard.
It is hard, absolutely.
But when it's particularly hard, I've liked the fact that the college seems to understand that it's hard, and people tend to rally around.
It is hard.
Any leadership position, I think, has its bad days, its bad sometimes years. But in a smaller college, in a smaller town, where the region looks to the college for a certain kind of leadership, I think that the chancellor is in a far more visible and vulnerable place than someone who has the sort of large insulating area around her or him that I have here. And so I've always been conscious of the fact that the college demands a lot, but it also rises up and provides the right kind of support.
A lot of that, of course, is Joe Smiddy's legacy, building a college that cared and with a chancellor that cared, and faculty are faculty. You know that. Somebody said once that if you wanted to have 1 hour left in your life, you hoped it was in a faculty meeting because it would go on forever. And faculty can be their own special characters. But as we kind of bring this conversation full circle, talk just a little bit, if all three of you would like to, of course, but really it's aimed to President Casteen and Chancellor Pryor, about Joe Smiddy as an emeritus, as an ambassador, as someone who's gone on even after those years when he had that chancellor's responsibility, and how he's helped the young chancellors like Jay Lemons, but then some that are more recent and maybe young in experience time, like David Pryor, yet I'm sure that wisdom that you could call on has been of value to you.
That's a nice question. I would say that, first of all, what I have valued in the relationship with Joe over many years is the fact that he always reaches out to me. Your natural reaction on meeting Joe is not just to shake his hand, but to put an arm around him. And it's not just physical, it's an emotional and intellectual kind of commitment too. But then there are other qualities that I think Joe has given the institution of the chancellorship that are important. For example, a completely unapologetic advocacy for change and excellence at Wise. Most of the college presidents with whom I worked when I was secretary at some point or another expressed distance from their institution's purposes, and probably without meaning to do it, undercut things a bit. I admired the fact that when Joe came and had his list of things he needed, you could pretty much bank the list. He needed it, he was going to get it. And I admired the fact that there was a certain amount of, it was always fun, but the part of the fun was always that Joe would encourage you to laugh with Joe at Joe. There was a humility in that way of approaching sometimes hard things. It was crucial. And I admired the fact that, as has been the case with the other chancellors I've known and watched, in those days, this is not the case now, in those days, each college president or chancellor was invited to address the House Appropriations Committee and the Senate Finance Committee. They stopped that years ago because when times got very tight, the repetition of we're starving to death got to be problematic. But I never saw anyone who seemed to be bored of the committee members, bored or not convinced. If there was a time when they had to say no to something, it's true even of Ed Willey at one point. Senator Willey really invented modern Virginia legislative politics. But Senator Willey at one point couldn't do something that the college needed, and his reaction was, I'm sorry, but I can't do that. As opposed to, I'm not going to do that, which was the more common response. There was simply an understanding that the Chancellor spoke with integrity, that he put himself on the line when he asked for something for the college. David has that quality. I like the journeyman quality of working the legislature one member at a time, constantly. And at least in recent years, when Sam Ewing has been the person in Richmond, we have increasingly had a seamless relationship between what our people from Charlottesville do and what Sim and the Chancellors have done from Wise, and in particular with the relationship between Sim and David. It may take two people to be one of you. But in any event, the two together have that kind of stature in the Assembly. And that stature in the Assembly is not a matter of standing up and being famous. It's a matter of being a gentle advocate, able to come back day after day and persuade people who have millions of demands on their plates, who hear from everybody about what everybody wants, but persuade them that the college is important, that the college is quality, that the college is opportunity, and that the college delivers what it promises. That's always been the approach that the college has made. And I think it characterizes the approach that you and Sam have taken. I like the consistency.
David, as you considered taking this job and looked at the college, you looked at the relationship with Charlottesville, and of course you got to know Papa Joe. Just talk about how that sort of symbiotically came together
Now,
for
you're
you.
assuming that we gave him time to consider.
To consider that.
I can tell.
The railroad job comes to mind. Well, it was an opportunity to take on, as Mr. Darden said, an experiment. I told the president that this thing had better be perfect and a perfect opportunity to do good, or I wanted no part of it. I mean, at this point in my career, I wanted to be able to say we're going to get our hands around something that was important. And that was the basic question I had for John Casteen, sitting in this office the first time I met him. And he answered that question very clearly. He said that it's important work, and that it may be a distance from here, but it's not out of sight and out of mind. And so that was a very important turning point in my consideration. I knew Charlottesville only from having been here for 3 years doing a PhD. I did not know Appalachia. And, but Mary Lou and I flew back from a visit in Wise and independently discovered that there was a pride about an area, a place, and that there was a welcoming spirit that seemed to be very deep, far more than the standard courtesies afforded a guest. And we both chatted about it independently. I said, "Did you notice that?" She said, "Yeah, I noticed that." And I said, that felt very deep. That was very sincere. And those are two things that really stood out. Certainly it was an academic challenge, being small, but also a sense of independence. And it was something that I think we find to be a remarkable model, that we have the opportunity to create an independent identity, an independent sense of initiative and service, but we've got this association with the University of Virginia that provides such a richness of tradition and expertise. And I use the vernacular and say we've got enormous horsepower to draw upon here in Charlottesville, but we can create our own identity, be ourselves in our culture, in our community. And that's a very unusual situation. You know, very often branches are mini versions trying to be the flagship institution. And we're not trying to be Charlottesville. We are UVA Wise. And that's a special place to be. But it comes only from the traditions that have been established. Chancellor Smiddy established a sense of community. He came with a sense of pride about place, region, and our service to the citizens of that area. And it's nurtured by President Casteen. That's a very special blend. And you were talking about personalities, the right point in time. For me, having the legacy of Joe Smiddy and that style, which we celebrate, as you well know, every chance we get. We're doing it in this room today. And to be reinforced by the personalities here at the university. Not only President Casteen, members of the board, the rector, this is very rewarding. So what Mary Lou and I saw as a challenge, but also a very unusual sense of pride of place and a sense of personal welcome is really come to pass. We were right. That's exactly what we found. And so on the good days and the bad days, it's very reinforcing.
There's something about Joe Smiddy as Chancellor Smiddy that's always struck me as a paradigm, and that's this. You think or you ask about what did or what does Joe believe in, and what you hear or what you think is college, region or community, and family. And the more you focus on that, or if you listen to David talk about what he's doing, you rarely hear what somebody's personal ambition is or what somebody personally accomplished. It's almost as though the ego of great leaders in the kinds of demanding positions that your chancellors have occupied, the ego gets somehow surrounded by the place, by the people, by the spirit of what the thing is, and that becomes the chancellor. You mentioned Chancellor Smiddy as emeritus. There's a sense in which he's not going to be emeritus. To have the living embodiment of what the institution stands for, a member of the community and an ally of the chancellor and so on, those are just tremendous assets. To have a board with the kind of continuity that the college's board has had, with the people who first conceived asking for or demanding a college, serving for as long as those people served on that board, teaching the institution's memory to successive board members, representing the values of the college in their own lives. That's just a tremendous break. It's a head start in the race. And then to have the kind of seamless transition that we have with Chancellor Pryor and Mrs. Pryor, it's worth 2 or 3 years of fancy talk to have the right person speak once. And I think the college has done that. I'm increasingly convinced that the strength is internal.
I believe it's a very strong community too, and I've said that through thick and thin, and it's a wonderful place to live, and to work. One of the colleagues I had said the longer you're here, the harder it is to leave, and I believe that that's true. Joe would tell you that he's never done any of this by himself, and that's one of his great attributes, and I'm sure David would say the same. And yet, and I've tried my best to keep Don Pippin's name out of it too much, but Don's one of those people that has a history from beginning to end, and such a connection to Joe and to the college and to Charlottesville. And those kinds of things show that there's more than a single person at work here. There is a community. And it's a community here, and it's a community in Wise, and it's that connection, which is so special.
Those first students that came here, Don being one of them, Mr. Darden, he'd look them up and see how you doing, and you making it okay? I mean, he not just Don. I mean, he'd look up these students, and so I want to thank all of you for the many blessings you've given to me, and I thought Jay Lemons paid me a compliment. There's 2 compliments I want to speak about. One is Jay said, Joe's here when he ought to be and gone when he ought to be. So, and after I retired, they had some trouble. People, faculty members, staff members, students would come to my house, and they'd give me all this bad word, and I'd say, I'll sit here and listen to you. I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going to say anything. I'm not going to talk to anybody. I'm not there anymore. I don't know what's going on anymore. So now if you just want a dead fellow to sit here and listen to you, okay. But that's all you're going to get out of me. But what I did always have, and not that everything I did was right, because I'm not perfect. But what I always had was, I had two wonderful wives and two wonderful children, and Brian Wills, my son-in-law. I always had family, grandchildren. I was thinking today, two children came here and 4 grandchildren came here, and what a blessing the university has been to all of us. My first wife, Rosebud, who cooked, and we paid for every entertainment. We had no budget, no money, but she always said, the next chancellor's wife won't really have to do this, but that's what it's about. That's what it's about. And then my second wife, Reba, has been such a blessing to me, and so I've had a team of support. But with the college, the support I had, you know, you can't be creative if you're insecure. You have to have some security.
That explains my lack of creativity.
Be creative. So I always knew that if I did the right thing, the university would support me. I also knew if I did the wrong thing, they wasn't going to support me. So that's the way it ought to be. That's the way it ought to be. And so, you know, I was so blessed to have this kind of security. For example, when the coal industry set in on me about the students protesting the need for reclamation laws, and one of the professors is out there very much, so they came to me and they said, we want this woman fired, we want these students back in the classroom and shut them up. Now, if we had been a local college, if we had had a local board, the professor would have been fired, I would have been fired. In fact, they told me, they said, if we had any way to get rid of you, we'd do it. But I knew that the university believed in the right and the need for students and faculty to be out there in the community. So it wasn't hard for me to make a decision, and I was not insecure. I knew that the university would support the activities of the faculty and the students. So I'm so thankful, and thankful for those first members, President Casteen, of the faculty that saw to it that we were not a 13th year of high school. When we had engineer John Litton of Litton and Engineers, Thompson Litton Engineers, that came and volunteered and taught engineering the first year. We had Stanley Botts, a fine lawyer and a wonderful person and one of the finest people in the community, came and taught law the first year. We had Charlie McElroy, who was an architect, who came and taught mechanical drawing to those students the first year. And then we had a seasoned faculty that had lots of experience. And we had Sam Crockett, who absolutely, the word no was not in his vocabulary. You could tell him no and it didn't mean a thing. It's just like pouring water on a duck's back. Sam did not, he's like Napoleon, c'est mot impossible, non français pas. The word impossible was not in his vocabulary. So we're so blessed to have this, the Lord put this group of people together. And those first students, now I went there, as you know, I left the industry, I left the Shell Oil. I was doing very well, and so I said, well, I'll go up there and teach these kids. Well, I went in that room with 36 students. They were nearly all Korean War veterans. We had 109 students, 70 of them were Korean War veterans. Those people were there to learn. I mean, they wasn't there to fool around. Yep. And if there's any teaching in you at all, when you go in a hot nest like this, you're either going to get with it or you're going to leave. These people came to learn. And they didn't make any bones about it. They were there.
You know, that's the quality about Clinch Valley, or now College of Wise graduates. It's always struck me. When I was in graduate school, I lived next door to a couple named Geraldine and Rodney Lawson.
Yes.
And Rodney at the time was, I forget whether he was in his graduate part of his engineering program or in the second 2 years, but they had both gone to the college. Extraordinary work ethic. She died in the last couple of years, but
Yes.
she had a career as a writer,
Good
playwright,
person.
and so
Really
on.
good writer.
And Rodney was a man who had the most extraordinary notion as an undergraduate engineering student of the difference he wanted to make in the world. He had a sense of mission about his work as an engineer. They lived down near Fincastle or somewhere toward the end of her life. But dedicated to the region, determined to excel in what they undertook, honorable people, believed in hard work. They have symbolized the college in my head for 40-odd years because of the experience of knowing them when we were all the same age. And doing
We
the
were
same
blessed that they lived next to you. Because you got an instant assessment too.
I wanted to bring us back one more time to some final thoughts. And of course, one of my final thoughts is how much I appreciate Chancellor Pryor coming up with this project. You know, I get to hear a lot of Joe Smiddy's stories because I got that relationship, and I get to go to lunch with him periodically and dinner and whatnot. But for this to then be archived and be remembered and be seen years from now, and I just think that's a wonderful legacy, and it's a wonderful thing for you to have done, Chancellor. We appreciate you supporting that, Mr. President. We appreciate your support as well. I mean, this is a busy time as you try to figure out how to balance budgets and inspire your provost and others as you try to get the interest of the university advanced, and of course the interest of the university is advancing our interest as well. And we appreciate you taking your time out and spending that time with us this afternoon. And of course, we appreciate the camera crew. We've got Keith Fowlkes, we've got Randy Gilmer, we've got Roger Hagee from our college relations, and back in Wise, Rue has set all of this up, and we appreciate her. And just a whole slew of folks that we can't name all of them, but a great asset to, I think, the history of the college. And it was my privilege to sort of carry on in Buck Henson's long shadow and try to keep the history of the college going, and this is a wonderful asset, I think, that'll add to that for years to come. But Mr. President, do you have any final thoughts as we wrap up, and then we'll pass it over to Chancellor Pryor?
No, I'll tell you what, I thought this was one of the luckiest afternoons I could imagine, to be able to sit and listen to my friend and admire my friend and have some
Thank
time
you.
with you.
You truly are a friend.
Well, this college is one of the great creations of the 20th century in our state, and it has repaid the investments in it so many times over that I don't know how you'd calculate it. It has enriched the lives of people, so the young woman who wanted to be enriched was predicting something, but it's also provided a kind of a living and very visible symbol of what education means in Virginia. It's something that from one generation to another needs to be reinforced. Learning in this state had a political origin. Madison and Monroe and Jefferson, when they first conceived the idea. Actually, regional colleges, that was the first thing they came up with, the state ought to have. But when they first conceived it, it was because they believed that people could not protect their freedom if they didn't have knowledge. And their description of why such institutions ought to exist had nothing to do with being wealthy or powerful, or didn't even talk about being leaders. They talked about simply the knowledge required, the strength to be free. And I've thought that of all of our modern creations, those in the 20th century, this college is the best single manifestation of the vitality of those conceptions in our time. And then I like it even more that the advocates were three men from the region, defining the region's needs, finding the ally, finding the leader, and having the persistence over the course of, 2 generations now, to maintain the vision and to build the institution as it is today. Every time I go down there and the skyline has changed, it just feels good. It says that there are things that are necessary simply because they are good, because they represent the best in what we are and what we do.
I think in closing, it's good to remember something that you put in your book, No Ordinary College, Brian, where Mr. Darden, reflecting upon the foundation of this college, noted that there would be a greater story to tell before many years passed away. Well, he was right. There has been a greater story to tell, and I'm confident, as are the people throughout the region are confident, that there's going to be an even greater story to tell as years pass. So I think we're in the middle of a wonderful story, and I want to thank each of you for being part of that, part of this project, but part of the story. And I want to thank all of you that support the college for being a part of this wonderful story. So thank you all for being here.